To welcome you to today's opening plenary. My name is Joel Brammeier. As Todd mentioned, I'm the president of the Alliance for the Great Lakes. I'm also a co-chair of the Healing Our Waters Coalition, and I have been for the last 2 years. This coalition of more than 120 organizations, educational institutions, zoos, aquariums, and museums are representing millions of people around the Great Lakes whose common goal is to restore the Great Lakes ecosystem. The Alliance has been a member of the Howe Governance Board since the coalition's inception, and I've been personally deeply rewarded by my experience with the coalition. And more importantly, I know the coalition's effort to restore the Great Lakes has strong momentum going into the future. And that's what we're talking about today. This afternoon, you're going to start hearing about a number of specific issues that coalition members are grappling with every day. Before we do that, I want to pull back and take an opportunity here to reflect on the bigger picture. What is it that has made this coalition been able to forge the social and the political and the economic consensus that is at the heart of the success that we've seen under the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative? More important than that, how is our region changing around us? And what do we have to do to keep up as a coalition to make sure that that consensus stays in place and grows in strength over time? And we've got some great panelists today who are going to help us think through that. So before we get to that, I want to set the stage here and give a little window into some of the tremendous successes that the coalition has seen in the last decade. Because of the emergence of broad partnerships and highly effective coalitions like Howe to advance the cleanup of the most globally unique freshwater resource on the planet right here in our backyard, we've experienced a restoration movement in the Great Lakes like none other across the country. I grew up in Michigan. Water was an expectation for me. I lived near it, I vacationed on it, and of course I drank it. Annual gatherings of my extended family were always centered around water. Large lakes, small lakes. And those times burned into my mind the value of convening around water here in the Great Lakes region. If you live in a Great Lakes state or province, the Great Lakes literally form part of the map around your home. You're reminded of it every day. Our quality of life, the viability of our cities and our neighborhoods, and our economic well-being is dictated by whether or not we choose to invest in our natural water capital. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here, and you probably all agree in some way with what I just said. Whether real or perceived, for a long time, we didn't get the reward that we were seeking as a Great Lakes community. For many years, other parts of the country actually made progress on some of the work that we're doing today while the Great Lakes languished. In the 80s and 90s, many people, including some people in this room, spent a lot of time creating plans and efforts around the restoration and cleanup of the Great Lakes. And we were told every time we went to Capitol Hill that we didn't have our act together. Our message wasn't coherent. We didn't know exactly what we wanted. In the first decade of the 21st century, the region decided to change that permanently. And with the leadership of Peter Wege and other visionaries, which you'll hear more about today at lunch, we started to make progress. At the same time that Peter Wege and the Wege Foundation were convening the first Howe gathering here in Grand Rapids a decade ago, as Mayor Hartwell mentioned, hundreds of groups and businesses and tribes and government agencies and individuals were getting together around a project called the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Strategy, which I'm pretty sure everybody in this room remembers, and many of you were part of that effort. This was the first ever comprehensive, stakeholder-driven description of what it was going to take to return the Great Lakes to health. Howe was an integral part of the creation of that blueprint for action. And with that, the first seeds of the success of this coalition were sown. Now, I mentioned before that before Howe, there had been many other opportunities to plan and think about what it's going to take to clean up the Great Lakes, but those plans don't actually get work done on the ground. The coalition proceeded on its path for the next several years, sharpened messages, refined its strategies, convened the region every year, and drove advocates and activists to Washington each year to walk the halls of Congress and tell them that Great Lakes was a priority. And after all that effort, nothing really happened. It might have looked like nothing was happening from the outside, but this is actually a case study in what can happen when philanthropy and organizations align and commit for the long haul. Congress was not signing checks, but Howe was building a larger and larger regional network and a regional cross-section of support. Every year when we went to Capitol Hill, we added voices, the mayors, the tribes, industry groups like the Council of Great Lakes Industries and the Great Lakes Metro Chambers Coalition, state organizations like the Great Lakes Commission and the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, speaking with a unified voice with the more than 100 members of Howe that Great Lakes restoration was a priority. And believe it or not, something did shake loose. In 2008, the Great Lakes became the center of the political reality of the United States. President Obama followed through on a campaign pledge to fund the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Strategy through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and the first year of that funding came through in 2010. The campaign pledge that President Obama followed through on was actually committed to and signed by both presidential candidates for both major political parties. This is a testament to the growth of the coalition's effort as a voice for the Great Lakes. Nearly 5 years later, more than $1.6 billion has been budgeted by the White House and appropriated by Congress for the GLRI, funding more than 2,000 projects. At the healthylakes.org website, you can see a map demonstrating more than 2,000 projects that have been funded by the GLRI across a broad spectrum of work. In an age when headlines every day reflect the fear of what Washington and the federal government will do to us, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is something that our region has taken and made into a model of what the federal government can do with us. DC politics, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, doesn't get a whole lot of love these days. But the strength and unity of the bipartisan support for Great Lakes work in Congress is absolutely awe-inspiring. And I think it's safe to say that in some corners, the Great Lakes are the envy of the nation. I am here to remind you that this is no happy accident or coincidence. It is the product of years of hard work by thousands of people and a willingness by everybody in this room and beyond to know when to keep our eyes focused on a common purpose and when to work on the issues that sometimes divide us. And that is a tremendous asset that this coalition continues to bring to the table. So as we approach the beginning of this fiscal year, 2015, there is, again, a consensus to provide $300 million for the GLRI. Tremendous. Why is it even more special? Because the White House budget actually showed a line at $275 million for the GLRI. And it was, in fact, many Republican members of the Great Lakes congressional delegation who were willing to step up to be among the first to pledge to restore funding to the $300 million level. This is almost unheard of in the U.S. House of Representatives in this day and age. It is a product of the tremendous consensus that Howe has built around the GLRI. So what is it going to take to continue to enjoy this kind of success and this kind of across-the-board support? We still lack a critical component, a separately authorized program that would be founded under legislation like the Great Lakes Ecological and Economic Protection Act. A great way to emphasize the importance of that authorized program is to talk a little bit about where we've been with some of the successes here in the Great Lakes. Parts of our region continue to struggle to emerge from a polluted past. You simply cannot redevelop an urban waterfront on the back of a contaminated sediment site. As Cam mentioned earlier, we just had two new locations, Waukegan, Illinois, and Ashtabula, Ohio, that were just recently reached their capstone projects for the cleanup of their AOC problems. More impaired water segments have been restored in the basin since the GLRI began in 2010 than in the entire prior 22 years. Decades of persistent pollution have been traded for a bright economic future. More than 115,000 acres of wetlands have been restored. More than 1,500 river miles have been cleared of barriers to fish. Right down the road in Muskegon, a shoreline restoration project has generated from a $10 million investment more than $60 million in economic benefits and more than 125 jobs. Tangible victories with measurable economic improvements. We have challenges in front of us that require us to think deeply, long, and hard about what it's going to take to organize to maintain this kind of momentum. The water crisis in Toledo was the product of many factors. Some are within our control and some aren't. This region, however, cannot broadcast itself as the freshwater capital of the world or as the home of the new blue economy if you can't even turn on the tap safely. So we turn our attention to the large amounts of phosphorus and nitrogen that pour into the waters of the Great Lakes. We need to stop phosphorus coming in from lawn fertilizers. We need to reduce combined sewer overflows and eliminate sanitary sewer overflows, of course. We need to treat stormwater as a resource where it lands, not as a pollutant to be drained away. And most of all, we have to acknowledge that agriculture must make substantial, measurable reductions of pollution for this problem to actually be solved. Clean water needs to be our universal expectation, not something that we manage on a sliding scale. We have to tackle this problem full on and in broad daylight. We must do more to prevent more invasive species like Asian carp from getting into the lakes. As you probably have read, the algae problem in Toledo is being exacerbated by the presence of zebra and quagga mussels. The knock-on side effects of invasive species are unpredictable. They're impossible to know, and yet we know that new ones are coming. We must prevent them from getting into the Great Lakes. And my final word on issues is going to be about climate change. We need to gird ourselves for a realistic future where climate change is going to have substantial impacts on all of the work that we're trying to achieve every day. Warmer water makes algae growth more likely. Warmer surface water makes evaporation happen more quickly. Reduced ice cover increases the amount of water that goes up into the air. We're seeing larger, more unpredictable precipitation events that turn the 100-year storm into the 10-year storm or the 1-year storm. Our models, our climatological models that are used to underpin billions of dollars of investment in water infrastructure around the Great Lakes are being outmoded and outdated as we sit here today. We cannot afford to allow the success of the past 5 years and our future success to be undermined by these kinds of threats. We've come a long way in the last 10 years. We've got a long way to go. So back to the first part of my comments, how do we get there? I believe that this region is as well positioned as any large watershed in the United States could possibly be to confront these threats. And I only say the United States, I will mention, because Healing Our Waters is a U.S. effort. But no doubt, there is a substantial partnership necessary to be built between the U.S. and Canada. To do this, we have to bring all of the interests to the table and maintain a common purpose and drive that has made our success so far so astounding. We understand that the people in our region, in our states, in our congressional districts and other elected officials' districts are at the heart of whether or not we can achieve this. And so I invite you to join me in a conversation about the changing nature of our region and gain some insights from our experts about the best ways to reach the audiences we need to reach in the coming decade. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to do the second speaker first, and then we'll roll right into Ryan's comments. So Michelle Kleppe is here as a senior vice president with 270 Strategies in Chicago. Michelle came to 270 Strategies after serving as state field director for the Virginia Coordinated Campaign, where she led the team that delivered 51% of the vote for Governor Terry McAuliffe in 2013 and ultimately resulted in a statewide sweep for Democrats. Michelle believes the power of organizing is in creating the space for public dialogue to tackle tough issues and better communities collectively. I agree. During the 2012 campaign, Michelle was state field director for the Obama campaign in the key battleground state of Wisconsin, where she ran the ground game operation that drove up voter turnout to secure a victory for the president. And I'll now introduce Ryan Steusloff. Ryan is with Perkins Allen Opinion Research, and Ryan has served as a pollster, a campaign manager, and communications director on numerous local, state, and federal campaigns. Ryan brings a wealth of experience in helping corporate and political clients identify effective messages and execute winning campaigns. A couple highlights from Ryan's background. During the 2010 election cycle, Ryan led research on over 50 winning campaigns, including the campaigns of freshman Congressman Steve Womack and Wisconsin Congressman Reed Ribble. During the tough 2006 election cycle, Steusloff was the lead pollster for the Oklahoma State House Caucus, helping Republicans maintain control of the chamber for the first time in over 100 years. So we have two wonderful speakers. Not only are they from different parties, they are from two different Great Lakes states. Michelle is a Badger, and Ryan grew up in Jackson, Michigan. So depending on how you feel about either one of those, Please give them your ears.
I actually think, can you all hear me? No. I guess we'll be stuck behind the podium then. I think they wanted to get the math section of the presentation out of the way first, so hopefully it won't be too painful, but what I do, I'm a pollster. I look at demographic trends. Where the polling questions you see in the newspaper, we ask those kind of questions, but we also ask deeper questions than that, looking at what motivates people, and beyond that, there's trends going on. And first, a little history lesson. Looking at the Great Lakes, I'm from Michigan, and as Joel mentioned in my biography, I've seen good years and I've seen not so good years from my side of the aisle. And what's unique about the Great Lakes is looking back over the course of who's controlled the state legislatures, it has gone back and forth. It's almost like the Western Front in Europe in World War I. It's Republicans make some gains and then Democrats make it back. And if we look at 2002, the red slides are state legislatures entirely controlled by Republicans. Blue are state legislatures entirely controlled by Democrats, and then the yellow is going to be a mix, where one chamber is controlled by one party and the other chamber by the other. And looking in 2002, Republicans had quite a few number of states. Illinois, we'll see throughout these historical trend slides, has remained a Democratic state. But there are 3 states that had split party. Now, going into 2004, Republicans picked up Indiana, but then 2006 happened, where there were gains in Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, and New York at the state legislative level where these chambers became split. Ohio remained red, Pennsylvania remained a Republican state as well, and Illinois a Democrat state. Moving into 2008, again, we saw gains by the Democrats, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, New York, and then Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania remained split. 2010 held steady. And then after the 2012 election cycle, this is where things stood. And a quick note on 2012, that's due in a large part to redistricting. Based on the controls of the chamber at that point, they were able to draw the lines. But the broad picture and the reason why I went through those slides, there won't be a test on the end, but is to make the point that you got to work with both sides. It's sometimes Republicans are going to be in charge, sometimes Democrats are going to be in charge, and we didn't show the makeup of the congressional delegation, but I know in Michigan, Ohio, and most of these Midwestern states, they're split, 50-50 or thereabouts. So you're going to have to work on both sides of the aisle, and as Joel mentioned in his talk, that's a large part of the reason why y'all have had the success that you've had, and it's going to be key going forward into the future. This is just one last chart on election control, looking at the polling going into the 2014 election. So that's the first piece. The first thing is that you've got to work with both sides. The second piece is that demographics in the Great Lakes are changing. There's a slide in here. I was born and raised in Jackson, Michigan. I went to the University of Michigan, and although we didn't have a very good weekend last weekend, I'm still proud to call that my alma mater. But of my high school class and of my people I went to college with, very, very few still live in the Great Lakes. Part of that is due to the recession that hit in 2008. Part of that is just due to the fact that there's more job opportunities in bigger cities like Chicago, New York, D.C., where I live. So what is happening to the population of the Great Lakes? And you'll see on these charts, and this is, I'll speed through these pretty quickly because I just want to make the top level point, and then we can get into more detail in the question and answer portion. But looking at African American population in the Great Lakes states, and this shows all the different states that are out there. Illinois has the highest African American percentage at 14.4. But if we look from 1990 to 2000, and this is all adults, according to the census, those numbers, with the exception of Minnesota, have all remained pretty steady. As a portion of the population, somewhere between 6 and 14% of the population are African Americans. But here's where we're seeing the big change and the trend moving up with Hispanic adults. In Illinois, makes up 16.3% of the population. And in every Great Lakes state, in New York, it makes up 18.2. But in every Great Lakes state, we see that percentage of Hispanics as a part of the overall adult population increasing since 1999, according to the census numbers. And what does this mean for white adults as a percentage of the overall population, and ultimately for what we care about, particularly since we're working on political issues, what that means for percentage of voters? As a percentage of the overall, white adults, the white population, has steadily decreased since 1990 and has continued to decrease into the 2010s. I just threw this in here. This is a survey we asked a few years ago, and it makes the point I mentioned a few moments earlier. 29% has had someone in their immediate family, and this is for Michigan only. This was an add-on question I did to a survey a few years back. 29% have had a member of their family leave the state to find work. So what does that do to the overall? And the thing when we're thinking about demographics and the change in the population, what is happening is the growth rate of each of those individual groups has slowed. They're still increasing, with the exception of Michigan. The population has continued to grow. It's just not growing at the same rate that it was back in our heyday. It's growing at a slow rate, mostly due to the economy, which is the next section. So what is the overall takeaway from the demographic changes in the Midwest or in the Great Lakes Basin? Well, number one, it's getting more diverse. As a percentage of the population and percentage of voters, Caucasians have decreased their percentage of the overall makeup. We're seeing Hispanics and Latinos increasing as a percentage of the overall. And we're also seeing a slow in the growth rate of overall population in each of these states. So, and that's all due to the next section, which is economic trends. Interesting news, and there was an interesting piece on college debt, and this partially explains it. More and more individuals in the Great Lakes region have a bachelor's degree. In Minnesota, a third have at least a bachelor's degree. In New York, at least a third. And we're right there between a quarter and a third in all of the remainder of the Midwest states. So the population is becoming more educated in terms of where they were 10, 20 years ago. Manufacturing, and this is the key piece. Every survey I've done since probably 2008, the number one issue, with a handful of exceptions, has been jobs in the economy. It's the higher order need that these voters have and that these adults have is making sure there's food on the table, that they can pay their mortgage, and their kids can afford to go to school. So compared to other things, everything else is a lower tier priority. And this is all due to the fact, particularly in this region, the fact that manufacturing has gone away as a percentage of the economy. A high of a quarter in Indiana, we're in the manufacturing industry. That's down to under 20%. Fewer than 1 in 5 are involved in the manufacturing sector. In Illinois, it's even worse. 12%, just over 12% are involved in the manufacturing sector. But across the board, there's been this slow decline. And you all live here, you all seen it, you all know. I'm not telling you something new, but it's really interesting to see this in quantifiable data, the extent of the decline of manufacturing in the Midwest, which I think is a good thing, and in some ways, in respects to protecting the Great Lakes, less manufacturing, less pollution. But it also means that the service industry is increasing, and particularly tourism, which I think is a very, looking ahead into how we sell something in an environment where jobs in the economy is the number 1, 2, and 3 issue. Something like protecting the Great Lakes doesn't, in the environment, always ranks fairly low in a survey, and in the surveys that I do, mostly because people are concerned with their higher order needs. It's something that'd be nice to have and something that they agree with. If you ask them as a agree, disagree, they'll always say, yeah, I think that's a good thing. But when it comes to allocating money and time, their number 1 priority is making sure that they get the economy back on track. The reason this slide is important is because the Great Lakes is a big piece of the economy. Tourism is involved in this sector here. This is the service industry. We couldn't break out, the census data doesn't actually have tourism as its own individual point, but the move to the service industry actually incorporates the increase in growth of tourism in the region. And you can see quite a stark increase in the number of jobs associated with the service industry and tourism. This is numbers. We couldn't fit them all on one slide. These are the numbers for New York and Pennsylvania. Still a great 5-point increase there in the number of people involved in the service industry occupations. So back to my previous point, unemployment percentages by state. In this region, we still really haven't gotten out of the Great Recession. It's still there. We see in 2000, unemployment was about 4-ish%. It remains stubbornly high. It's actually even higher in some of these states like Illinois than it was at the outset of the crash in 2008. 9.4 in Illinois, but right in between the 8% range for all the states in the Midwest region. So the thing to be aware of, and the thing that I want to caution you all or have you all think about, is that when candidates are running or when members of Congress or members of state legislatures are talking to their constituents, what they're hearing in their phone calls and their letters are about jobs and the economy. And for something to be successful, particularly in this environment, in this region, it needs to at least acknowledge its role in creating jobs and improving the economy. And the second thing is a caution. You see some of these states, it's a race to the bottom on to give tax cuts and really give away a lot of the things that have been done in terms of protecting the Great Lakes or protecting the environment in the name of creating jobs. And it's something just to be aware of, and it's a challenge that you all are going to have to acknowledge and figure out how to work around and how to prevent. So, and this is just a last slide on a survey I believe you all did. And this illustrates the point. This is a survey that they did in the state of Ohio in 2014, asking, considering new, stronger regulations to prevent runoff pollution from farms that end up in the state's rivers and streams. Do you support or oppose? 2/3, 66%, would favor that type of regulation. 1 in 4 would oppose that. I'm assuming those are mostly farmers. But it does make the point that this is an issue that if you get it on a yes or no basis, people will agree with you. But if it's in the context of all the other different concerns that they have, it's a tougher issue to sell. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Good morning. How are we doing? Good. Try that again. Good morning. Good morning. I know it is difficult being on the other end of long days with speakers. So we are hoping to transition this shortly into Q&A. Hopefully you guys will have some questions and we can be helpful. I first wanted to just thank all of you for having both Ryan and I. We both had breakfast together this morning. It's not often that I get the opportunity to work so closely with somebody on the other side of the aisle, but you guys have inspired that, and it's been really cool to work with all of you guys over the last several months, kind of pulling this organization together, or this presentation together. So what I wanted to do is take a couple of minutes and try and identify the what now, right? So we've looked at all of these trends, where demographics, where politically, where economically we're headed over the next 10 years. What can we do about it as a coalition and as individual organizations to make sure that we are capitalizing on the opportunities that are ahead and continuing the success that you guys have seen over the last 10 years? To do that, a little bit of background on myself. So as Joel mentioned, I work with a firm called 270 Strategies. We work with causes, companies, and campaigns to mobilize people to take action. And we do that in several different ways. Where my specialty or expertise comes in is in helping develop an integrated strategy that allows organizations to scale relatively quickly, oftentimes with minimal or no additional resources, and also develop systems and structures that allow organizations to be much more proactive and be able to react and adapt quickly to external forces and opportunities that may arise. And so this section is really about what can we do over the next several years to position ourselves in a way that anything that kind of happens on the calendar, opportunities that come up, you as individual organizations and as a coalition are in the position to be able to really harness and capitalize that. So when I talk about integrated strategy, what do I mean? What we typically how we typically define this is we want to make sure that any strategy that's developed is developed using the most up-to-date data that is available, and that's used to develop strategy and kind of check strategy long-term, right? Going back to making sure assumptions that were made in the beginning are being met, and that all along the way we're collecting really valuable information that are either helping kind of steer us in a new direction or validate the work that we're doing. We also want to make sure, when I talk about digital, that we are mobilizing and engaging people both online and offline. And oftentimes, over the last 10 years particularly, we're building out these really cool online engagement tools, right? You can, in every sector, you can order your groceries online. You can, in some cases, register to vote online. You can sign online petitions. You can take all of these actions online. But we want to make sure that online programs are also connected to offline organizing. How do we take people who find our organizations, find our petitions online, say we support you, and actually turn those into donors and turn those into supporters and get them to turn out during election time and get them to come and help us lobby on specific lobby days? And so really making sure that those two programs are linked, and having really strong data allows us to do that as well. And then I mentioned on the front end, the organizing and advocacy. This is really about how do you develop a structure that's going to allow you to scale over time, again, with minimal or no additional resources. Okay, so the first thing, it's hard to not walk away from this. I'm a pacer. Okay, the first thing that I like to talk about is know your supporters. And let me preface the next couple of slides by saying the way that we kind of looked at this was how can we both strengthen the coalition as a whole moving forward, but part of that is also strengthening your individual organizations, right? So how do we take the incredible work that's been done already, dig a little bit deeper and build out and strengthen your individual organizations, which will also put us collectively in a better position to push forward. And so the first thing that we wanted to talk about was know your membership, and this is both know the organizations that are part of the coalition, and for each of your organizations, understand who truly is a part of your organization. And when I talk about this, there are a couple things specifically that I think are helpful. So a lot of us and a lot of organizations do have a ton of information, right? You have information on people who donate, you have information on people who sign petitions online, you have people who sign petitions out on the street or show up to an event or show up somewhere. Think about what you're doing with that information and how can we store it in one place to then be able to segment it out and make sure that we're delivering the right messages to the right individuals. And so oftentimes, and I've been guilty of this in past experiences, I've got 7 or 8 different places I store data, right? So I've got Excel spreadsheets, and I've got a voter file, and I've got Salsa or Salesforce or all of these different really cool databases. None of them talk to each other, or if they do, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. The power of being able to have and collect all of your information in one place allows you to be that much more flexible and be able to respond quickly when something comes up. So if there is a local legislative initiative and you need to reach out to a specific demographic of people who have taken action with your organization before, it's really easy to pinpoint exactly who that universe is, as opposed to having to send out an email to all 5,000 or 10,000 or 300,000 of your supporters and not be able to kind of identify or have an assumption of how many of those individuals will take action based on your ask. So I think understanding who your supporters are, and I think this is in 2 pieces. One is you guys have a lot of information now, so being able to pull it all together in one place and really start identifying which groups have done what, which people have taken action online only, which people have only donated but never done anything else with your organization, which people have signed a petition but never been asked to do anything else. Begin to start segmenting those out. The second piece of this, I think, is being able to look then at how you guys are collecting data currently and figure out if there are any opportunities to add onto sign-in sheets or in an email ask for additional information to help kind of build up this bank of information. This is something that's been particularly in the political world over the last 10 years, something that's been really sexy to be able to use data strategically and target individual voters and constituencies. The same practices and principles are true anytime you want to be able to engage a specific group of people. But part of being able to engage them is knowing who they are and what they've done. Oh, and supporters. all of this leads to just better targets, being able to match the asks with the right individuals. The second thing that we talk about, so the first thing is understanding who you currently have in your organization and maybe where are there pockets of individuals that you want to do outreach to grow out that sector. The second thing that we like to do, and this is particularly important to the actual organizing or mobilizing of individuals to take action, is develop a ladder of engagement. Has anyone here heard of a ladder of engagement, used a ladder of engagement in the past? Couple of you guys? Great. So the way that we think about this is you want to be able to take individuals who show any interest in your organization and over time slowly increase their level of engagement with you, right? So on the next slide, I'll go through, I always think about this in terms of fundraising, right? You don't meet somebody on the street and ask them for a $5,000 check. You don't know anything about them. It's a really, really high ask. It's a lot to ask of somebody that you don't know anything about. They have no relationship with you. And so this is all about recognizing where people are at and then slowly making asks and building a relationship with them over time to get them more bought in to your overall goals, to the organization as a whole, and want to come out and work and support you. And so here are two example ladders of engagement. We actually work with organizations to build out ladders of engagement for any strategic goal an organization has. You can build them for fundraising, you can build them for building out a volunteer infrastructure, for increasing your level of donors online. Here are two that I think are somewhat helpful to emphasize the point. So the first one on the left side of the screen, you start out with just a citizen, right? This is maybe a group of individuals that you've identified as there should be potential there, this group should want to support us or could be really great and help us push our goals forward, but we don't really have any connection with that individual or with that group yet. They may, what I call passive engagement, you may be able to get one of your current supporters or members to forward them an email and say, hey, check out this great organization. They may see a share graphic on Facebook and be like, oh, this is interesting, right? They're not actively engaging with you guys, but somehow information about your organization is getting to them. Once that has happened, once they've kind of been made aware that you guys are out there, you may be able to then send them a petition and say, hey, you know, so-and-so recommended you or got your name from Sally down the street who said you're a big supporter, would love for you to sign on to this petition. Slowly increasing their level of familiarity and their level of engagement with the organization. Then you kind of have them as a supporter. You have minimally their name, hopefully some contact information, but you've taken them from somebody that isn't familiar with your organization and kind of over the course of 3 or 5 or 10 or weeks or months, you've kind of gotten them to the place where at least you have their information as a supporter. Once you have them as a supporter, how can you increase their level of engagement from just signing a petition to maybe coming out and volunteering for an event like this or coming out and lobbying on a lobby day? Part of that, again, is recognizing who they are, right? So if you know that they've only signed a petition, they've never donated money, they've never come to an event, maybe the next ask is, join us for an event. We know that you signed a petition a couple weeks ago. We're holding this event in your neighborhood. We'd love for you guys to come out and meet us and find out more about the organization. The point here is making sure that you're structuring these asks in a very intentional way that over time increases the level of engagement. Most of my experience working with organizations is that with organizations or coalitions around advocacy issues, is that most of these asks are there, right? So what you're asking individuals to do, you have, and they're well thought out and they work. This process is really just bringing those and placing them in order to say, what's the easiest thing we would ever ask somebody to do? What's the most challenging thing we would ever ask somebody to do? And rank order it so that you're not starting off with something that's gonna be like, I don't have time for this, this is too much, I can't get involved with an organization that's gonna ask that much of me, but over the course of time, being able to slowly build a relationship with them and get them to that point. Does that make sense? I see nods, I'll take that as a yes. Okay, part of what this allows us to do, and I just kind of went through this, is match up the right messengers with the right messagees with the right messages. right? I had to practice that a couple times because I always screw that up. These are just two examples, right? So you wouldn't ask somebody who's donated $5 in the past, you wouldn't send them an email being like, we just need you to contribute $500 to meet our goal, because they're gonna be like, you have no idea who I am or what my level of interest is, and I would just delete that email if it didn't already go to spam. The second one is take an action offline. So somebody that has come to one of your events before, shown up in person, or helped volunteer, they've already shown a considerable amount of effort and engagement by coming out and actually donating their time. So you don't want to send them a "we'd love to meet you in person" email or invite, right? And not pretend, but make it feel like, wait, you didn't realize I was there last week, right? I'm an individual that you're asking for my time or my money or my resources. The more that you can recognize that and be able to speak to that, the more likely an individual is going to be like, this is the organization I want to work with, right? Any of us, I'm sure everyone in this room has volunteered for dozens of organizations over the year. Where you go and spend time is where they know you, where they remember your name, where they know what you've done, where they ask how your family is when they come in, or they remember that you went on a vacation. None of us like going to a place and spending time or giving money to a place that treats us like it's the first time we're meeting them every time we interact with them. And so a lot of this is just making sure that we're being intentional in the way that this plays out. The final thing, and then we'll open it up for questions. The final thing just to kind of tie this all together, is being able to use the information you have. If you are in a position to be able to go out and collect additional information, whether that's buying information or creating models or using analytics, great. Most of us are not in that position ever, if not every great once in a while. So really think about what resources, information do we already have that we can start utilizing, right? Then how do we build out the level of asks and the needs of the organization? Then we marry those two together and say, okay, we have kind of X number of people that have done the minimal ask. We want to be able to, over time, increase that. And I think the piece that I would highlight here, and this is going back to the data piece, is the idea of this is to be able to test these things over time, right? So one of the most challenging things with advocacy work, unlike electoral work, is it's not as simple as getting to 51%. I love electoral work because I like math, and if I can get to 51%, that's it. I'm successful. I can win or lose. Advocacy work is a lot more challenging. You don't know if you need 122 votes, 5 votes, 13 press clips, right? There's no magic formula to be able to say, if we do X, we will get Y. It's hard. And so part of what you can do, or part of what we all are striving to do in this space, is test assumptions to try and get a little bit better at being able to estimate what work needs to go in to move the needle at all, right? And so part of that is, if we send out an email to 100 people who have taken action offline, how many of them will show up? That way, if we need to do a rapid response, because there's a bill coming up next week and we've got a very little time to build, we have some historical information that out of 100 people, we can get 10 to show up. Great, so let's send that email, and then let's figure out what other tactics we need to employ to get to the 15 or 20 or 30 people, right? And so all of these different pieces can be tracked and should be tracked, should be designed to build an assumption that says 50% of the people that we ask to donate $3 will donate $3. If it comes back lower, we adjust it for the fundraising goal for the next quarter, right? A lot of these things, I think, are helpful, particularly in advocacy groups, to view in the lens of fundraising, because so much of what you guys are able to do depends on the money that you guys are able to raise. But I would take that same level of intentionality and that same level of research on donors and apply it to your current supporters, being able to test out assumptions and then build programs out and adjust them accordingly. That is what I have kind of for this section. And then we really wanted to open it up and see if you guys have questions, what can be helpful with. We talked a little bit about the research, a little bit about kind of organizing opportunities or infrastructure opportunities. What questions do you guys have for us? Right? And I think Joel's going to moderate this for us.
Thanks, Michelle. There are Let's see, there's a mic stand over here, and we've got one roving mic up here on the stage that I'll hand off to somebody who comes up and grabs it. So if you do have questions for the panelists, please come up to the mic and ask your questions. I'll start, since I'm the moderator. So one of the things that I see a lot of in the political environment over the last few years is that instead of, well, it's not universal, but you see a lot of examples of instead of looking for new audiences to try to establish your message with and build buy-in for what you're doing, people tend to double down on the existing audiences that are already committed to their cause and really harden those lines as a way of ensuring things like voter turnout and the kind of advocacy that drives elections. I'm wondering if each of you can share an example of a place where you actually saw, you know, in light of some of the demographic changes that we talked about, you actually saw a new audience make that connection with on one of your campaigns in a way that brought over folks that you hadn't actually been working with previously.
Let's see. So I think more generally, and then this will go into an example. I think this is one of the big challenges that the advocacy space faces in general. And I think part of the way that I've thought about this, both in the advocacy work that I've done, but also in the electoral work that I've done, is in order to get more, to double down and get more out of the kind of individuals or coalitions that you already have on your side, you have to make a really compelling reason for really busy people to give you more than they already can, which is hard, right? It's hard to get anybody to give you any time. When you're talking about people who have been a member of your organization for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, they're likely committed enough that they're kind of giving you everything they have. And so I think that just kind of highlights the need and the reason to figure out how to broaden the base of support. I think there's two things that I would point to, and we did this a little bit last year in Virginia. It was looking at individuals who don't typically vote in non-federal elections. So that was kind of our pathway to victory, or how we were going to get at that point to 51%. But looking at how do we take people who didn't know there was an election happening, have never voted when the president isn't on the ballot, get them to A, know there's an election, feel motivated to go vote, and then actually go cast their ballot. And what we did was we did just a bunch of research on the front end, focus groups, polling, talking to these individuals and finding out what information they currently knew, and then what they cared about that we were going to be able to talk to and move them forward. And I think the research is what led us to be able to identify individual messages that were moving voters, right? And so Ryan mentioned jobs and the economy has been predominantly an issue that's influenced politics for the last 10, 15 years. But what we found was we went in and we talked to single women and talked to them about what was at stake with the Affordable Care Act implementation and what would help them or not be available to them. And the more individual we made it to, this is how this issue affects you personally, less as the state or the Commonwealth, less as the country, but really zeroing in on what were the individual motivators that would get them to recognize how personal this is and what's at stake for them. It was kind of less about here's what we could do in the future if we get this great guy in. It was more about here's what's at stake if we don't, and here's how it individually impacts you. And I think the more you can make that individualized and around values is something that really moves people.
No, I agree, and shameless self-plug for my industry. I think research is critically important because there's never one answer. It's more often than not, it's going to be on your non-typical issues. I know there was a zoo tax that we were working on in Missouri, in one of the bigger cities there, and that's not an issue that people are thinking about every day. So we were able to present something as an issue and present it in a new way, give them new information, and you really never know what's going to work. I remember doing a congressional campaign, and we tested all the standard arguments and messages about jobs and the economy, and the candidate's wife insisted that we add a question in there about the congressman's bill to end puppy mills. And it was the candidate's wife, and we, all on the campaign team kind of rolled our eyes. We're like, this election's going to be about, I don't remember what year it was, either Obamacare or the economy or whatever it was. But we put it in there just to keep her happy. And it ended up being the best message with several key subgroups. And we actually had puppies for the congressman bumper stickers made up and put on cars. And you never actually know what's going to cause a voter to change their mind or consider your issue or consider your candidate, particularly in the environment we are in 2014. I think for the last couple cycles that the battle lines have been fairly clearly. You hear the word Republican, that comes with a certain set of assumptions about who they are and what they're going to do. You hear Democrat, comes with a similar set of assumptions, and people have kind of picked their side, so to speak. So particularly on candidate issues as well as on other issues that are outside jobs in the economy, you need to find creative ways to get them to reevaluate the issue. If they're locked in on Republican good, Democrat bad, or Democrat good, Republican bad, you're never going to have a conversation with them. You're never going to get them to think. It needs to be no longer a settled issue in their mind. They need to get around the mental shortcuts that they take on particular issues. I mean, particularly with Republicans, and I'll speak for my side of the aisle. And I'm here. I grew up in Michigan. I went out to the dunes every summer. I appreciate the Great Lakes, but on its face, if you look at this conference, the people are like, why the heck is a Republican speaking at it? So the key thing is to kind of get people beyond their initial assumptions, introduce new information to get them to look at your issue, at least give it a second chance rather than kind of what's been out there in the media.
Great, thank you. And I really appreciate you both drawing out those values connections, because I think everybody in this room thinks about that quite a lot. I know we've got a line forming in the audience here, so Keith, you first?
Sure. Yeah, hi, Keith Demoff with the Ohio Environmental Council. I'm wondering what tools you have used successfully to identify supporters to begin with. We've been using a voter activation network database and some other things. And I'm wondering what you've seen that's successful, and then once you've identified those people that have an affinity for your mission, what are you seeing as the successful way to get your foot in the door with them? Is it canvassing, phone banks? What's the actual tactics that you've seen be successful at that point? Thank you.
There's so many good answers to that question. Okay, so I think a couple of things I would say. When it comes to kind of how do you identify these supporters on the front end, the answer is there's no silver bullet. But there are a ton of different things that you can try and test out to see which works the most efficiently and effectively, right? And so a lot of organizations that we'll work with push out the online petitions just to be able to kind of get a broad base of individuals who, again, very low bar ask, they click a button, we now have your information that we can go back and see at what level can we start asking you to do more. So I think online petitions are great. I also think look at what you guys are currently doing. So I've been working with this organization based out of Chicago called the Citizens Utility Board, and they're doing advocacy work for the Illinois Environmental Council. They have been kind of viewing their organization as two separate pieces. They do direct service work where they go in and work with individuals on how to save money on your utilities bills, and then they're trying to do this grassroots advocacy work. And we went in and we worked with them and we're like, you actually have a ton of people that you're engaging with on a daily basis in the direct services. How can we utilize the work that you're already doing there to start identifying supporters to potentially turn into advocates long term? And so they sit down one-on-one with these individuals and go over their utility bills, and they have all of these great stories of, I saved this family $75 a month, I saved this person $50 a month. And so we said, okay, well, let's start slowly adding in some things that you can utilize to be able to amplify that message. So now when they sit down with a family and they find out that they save the family $75 a month, they'll snap a quick picture of the individual that says, I saved $75 a month, that's pizza every Friday night for my entire family, right? It personalizes it, it makes it a little bit more real, and we've turned that into a share graphic that now gets posted online to highlight what Cub is doing across the state of Illinois and drive people to their website to find out more about their organization. They go to the website. We've worked with them to optimize their website to make sure that the first thing they see is give us your email address and sign up for updates. We've worked with them on their email program to make sure that they're sending out one ask. So my point here is a lot of what you guys are already doing is probably producing a great pool of potential either supporters or volunteers or donors. And so think about ways that you can just kind of creatively tweak what you're currently doing and move people from how they first engage with you through a ladder of engagement. I think the bottom line is make sure it's genuine and real, right? Don't do something that doesn't feel right to your organization. But if you guys go out and do crowd canvassing, if you guys are already canvassing door to door for other purposes, right? Wherever you meet your current supporters, members, people who are interested in your organization, those are always the best ways to pull people in. And so I would start there.
Yeah, and from the research side of things, I mean, we do quite a bit of donor research, and it's probably the closest to what you're looking for. But the first thing is take a look at who are your supporters already. What do, demographically, age, how much are they giving? And not just your current active supporters, but people who've lapsed. And then try to figure out, engage with them. Why did they stop giving money? Why did they stop donating? Is there something that we can do different? Is there a particular mission that got you really excited 5 years ago that we're no longer going after anymore, and is that the reason why you've dropped off? And then the second piece, I guess, and I don't know, I mean, this is probably a bit more sophisticated. We're doing it at this point on statewide campaigns in the country. I imagine in a few years, and since we're supposed to be talking about the future, I'll mention it, but with analytics, we're able to find out and make predictions on how certain people will behave. And if we can just take a look at the people who are donating to your organization today, what characteristics they have, what types of magazines they read, what types of cars do they drive, all this consumer data that's out there allows us to identify other people like them who would be willing to donate or volunteer for your organization. So that's kind of the two pieces I would say to go to look for new people. First, take a look at what you have already, identify what's unique about them that's given them an affinity for your group, and then use that to find other people similar to them and grow your organization.
To the second question that was asked, just quickly, how do you kind of then engage them, or what are the best practices or tactics that have been proven successful there? Again, I think part of this is it's different for individual organizations, so start kind of tracking what you're doing now and then seeing which ones are most fruitful in the end. But I think there's also a general principle that meet people where they're at. And so if they call your organization to get information, call them back. If they come to your website looking for information, engage them online, send them an email, right? Part of this is meeting people where they're currently comfortable and then slowly building a relationship to move them over time. So I think meet people where they're at, and then the more you can make it feel personal, right? It shouldn't be just an automated response from a website that's info at, right, whatever, that you never put a personal face on it. So I know that's a little bit more taxing sometimes on resources, but the more you can call somebody who shows any interest and say, I'm Michelle, I work for this organization, or I'm volunteering for this organization, this is why, I'd love to find out more about who you are and where your interests lie. That's a big difference, because right now everybody's kind of overloaded with information online, on TV, and so that's one of those things, in addition to the values, that really breaks through.
Yeah, and one final
We're
point.
going to move on.
Well, one final point is keep all your data. You mentioned it in your speech, but there's just so many times where the finance department isn't talking to the grassroots, and there should and ideally be a big overlap between those two groups. And if you don't know what one, the left hand is doing or the right hand's doing, you lose a lot of valuable opportunities to learn about who your activists are, but B, also you're doubling up on effort and could potentially annoy them in the future.
I know we got a few more questions, so I want to get to Rich.
Yeah, I'm curious about the demographics you showed. I couldn't see them all. I was in the back. It looked like it would be close to, if not a majority, of non-white in the Lake Erie region in the next 10 years. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, it's heading that way, and that's all due to
You got to do a lot of clicks.
You don't need. You can just say yes.
That's all due to.
Hold on one second. So it's heading that way towards 50% non-white, and if you look around in this room, it's probably 99% white. And I think strategically, I'm curious how you guys might advise us to engage non-white audiences and be more relevant going forward, especially as we enter a new strategic planning period.
Yeah, it's something. I mean, I think and this is the slide here, if I can. It's Hispanic. All the demographic changes are primarily being driven by the growth in the Hispanic population in the Great Lakes region. So this is the only group that's growing. And if you look at kind of overall, there's still an increase in the white population. It's just not growing as fast. So as a result, it's becoming a smaller piece of the percentage of the overall population. The African American percentage of the population is growing at a rate that's kind of keeping it flat as a piece of the overall population. So yes, it's becoming more diverse. In terms of outreach, I mean, I do more of the polling in the data side of things, but I think that you can't ignore those growing minority populations, because they're going to be an important voice, particularly in and around big cities. That's kind of where we're finding the most growth. And I think the first thing I would do is to kind of figure out where their needs are. What would it take to get them to care about and move the Great Lakes up the ladder of importance and get it closer to jobs in the economy, because that's, again, the overall number one issue among all demographics. So, and particularly with African Americans, given where the unemployment numbers are with that group, and with Hispanics as well. So I think the first step is to learn about where their concerns are and how to engage them effectively.
Yep. I think once you have kind of what are those messages that are motivating, what are those angles that are going to be effective in having those conversations, it's really building relationships with them. And I know I've said that several times, but it's one of the strengths of your coalition is the relationships that you guys have built amongst all of your individual organizations, amongst the business community, amongst several different entities. This is the same thing. Identifying organizations that you think align with those values, or that you can share some of those values, and sitting down with them and finding out, how can working together help move the goal forward.
There's no substitute for one-to-one conversations. I think the gentleman here was next.
So Jeff, in your presentation, you mentioned that one of the ways that we can move the needle forward on Great Lakes environmental issues is to sort of engage the tourism industry. That tourism is increasingly becoming a more important economic sector in the region. And I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking about lobbying and, traditional alliances that lawmakers may have with other industries. And I'm just wondering, actually it's a question for both of you guys, what advice would you have for the tourism industry in getting its message to lawmakers who might have allegiances to other industries that might, be required to, have more regulation if environmental laws were put into place?
And I think, the Pure Michigan campaign here in Michigan is I think it's probably one of the best tourism ads I've seen in a long time, and it's both here in the state of Michigan, and I've seen it in hotel rooms all over the country, but reinforcing the idea of how important tourism and the role tourism plays in developing this economy. Because again, how I think about things is economy is priority 1, 2, and 3, and that's how, particularly on my side of the aisle, legislators are thinking about bills as they come before them. What is this going to do for the economy? So it's even on issues that, and I mentioned this as a potential danger spot, Keystone XL, depending on what you think about that, the number one argument on the Republican side is it's going to create a whole bunch of jobs and bring a bunch of money into the economy. So you need to be able to frame and make sure that you place tourism and the importance of protecting the Great Lakes into that same lane, so you can have the same argument. And so it's becoming a question of Do we want jobs that are going to make the beaches clean and make Michigan a nice, beautiful place, or the Midwest for that region a nice, beautiful place to live, or something that's going to not only hurt a sector of our economy being tourism, but make it a worse place to live?
Yep. I think it's both. I think it's definitely in figuring out how to frame it into what is currently a priority. I think the second thing that I would add is don't underestimate the power of bringing in more voices than traditional industry when it comes to lobbying legislators. And so it can't, in my mind, it's not an either-or thing. You don't either have the right message or you have this really broad coalition of individuals or a broad collection of individuals that can go lobby down at City Hall or the state legislature, but it's both, right? And so part of that, a couple like small best practices, but are actually extremely important because of online petitions and how many, just because that's really taken off, and even offline petitions, making sure that you're showing legislators that these are actually the voters in their district that care about these issues, right? And so it may create a great press story to go drop off 5,000 pages of petitions that were signed by individuals and say, look at all of the support that's around this individual bill or around this initiative, but make sure that their voting address is on there, right? Something simple, but that matters. And in their legislative offices, they're actually telling how many of these people are my constituents, or how many of these people were some high traffic canvas in the nearest high population city, right, that they don't actually hold me accountable. And so I think the winning formula, after I said there was no winning formula for these things, is making sure that there's both, right? There's a broad base of support and pressure coming from the ground and from untraditional voices that legislators have to hear, and then also framing it in what they're ultimately going to be held responsible for come election season or come long term.
Well, and the other thing to think of, I was just doing the calculation in my head. I think most of the Great Lakes shoreline in the state of Michigan, which is the state I'm most familiar with, is represented by a Republican member, which means that tourism is a important big industry in their district. So also, and there's also, using those types of members to reach out to their buddies in the caucus to say, hey, look, this is a big district, this is a big issue in my district, I need your support on it, and using that as an avenue to reach out to. I mean, the fact of the matter is if, Pollution Inc. is employing 50% of someone's district, you're not going to get their vote. But if you have someone who has a major reliance in their district on tourism, you can get them to be an advocate to their fellow members.
Thanks. Pollution Inc., I'm going to use that. Unfortunately, I have to cut this conversation off because we do have to move on to the next part of our program. What I'm really encouraged by listening to this back and forth is that this idea of the combination of the economic message with the values message for the Great Lakes is something that Healing Our Waters is doing really, really well. The challenge is how do we take that information that we just saw today about the people living and voting and working in the region and connect that message to more of them. And I don't think there's a silver bullet, as you said, Michelle, but I know that a lot of folks in this room are very, very committed to expanding that message beyond the people that are sitting here today. So with that, let me say thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.